Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd like to thank the chairman and ranking member for holding this meeting today. I'd also like to thank you for being with us today and for sharing your thoughts and your expertise. We can all agree on the need for more affordable housing and bringing the opportunity for our families to have a safe and affordable place to live, whether it's an apartment or a single-family home. Housing stability impacts so many of our lives, our health, how our children learn at school, our ability to build wealth, and the social benefits of belonging to a community. As we discuss affordable housing, we need to remember this includes all income levels, ages, and locations, including rural communities and tribal lands. One piece of legislation that would help increase the access to affordable housing is the Rural Housing Service Reform Act that I introduced with Senator Smith. Senator Smith and I have worked together over the last 2 years to create this bipartisan, common sense legislation that would provide the first meaningful update to the Rural Housing Service in years. I want to thank my colleagues on the committee, Senators Loomis, Tester, Crapo, Fetterman, Daines, Van Hollen, Cortez Masto, Britt, Warner, and Tillis for their support of this legislation. With over half the members of the committee evenly split, Republican and Democrat, this legislation is truly bipartisan in nature. The Rural Housing Service Reform Act would take large strides towards making RHS more accessible to folks across the entire country. The legislation would preserve workforce housing by fixing a long-standing problem for USDA Section 515 properties that now have maturing mortgages. It would expand both access and affordability of housing on tribal land by codifying a pilot program that leverages Native Community Development Financial Institutions, or CDFIs. And finally, it would make much needed investments in technology upgrades so that USDA can process loans quickly and efficiently. My first question is for Mr. Josephs. Could you speak to how provisions in the Rural Housing Reform Act would increase access to affordable housing across the country?
Yes, thank you for that question. So what we're talking about is the Section 515 portfolio of housing at USDA that we talked about that we're losing. And we've lost, in 5 years between 2016 and 2021, we've lost 921 Section 515 properties. So, and some of them because the owners were opting out of their mortgages early. So, and that was 3 times more than the USDA had projected. So we're losing them at a faster clip than we'd even anticipated. So that's the criticality of this program is if they are being lost, at least let's get rental subsidies continuing there so they can keep being affordable to low-income families.
Thank you. And then, Mr. Joseph, one more follow-up. We've seen success in South Dakota with the USDA's Native CDFI Relending Demonstration Program. It was a pilot program that allows Native CDFIs to leverage their really deep ties in local communities and deploy loans to eligible Native borrowers. Could you speak to the success of the program and how expanding it could help increase housing affordability on tribal land elsewhere as well?
Yeah, we think a relending model is a great way to go. CDFIs have their roots in those communities. They know the borrowers. It's easier for them to kind of make those inroads than the agency staff. So it's just a great tool. They also use it for their community facilities programs. Utilizing the CDFI network is a really smart way to go.
Thank you. And look, it works. It's one thing, these folks understand tribal trust land and how to work through the issues of title. It actually makes it work. Dr. Antoni, Antoni, thank you. Rising regulatory costs are a limiting factor on housing supply, particularly for the entry-level market in need of inventory. According to a study done by the National Association of Home Builders, on a dollar basis applied to the average price of new homes of $394,000 a year, regulation accounts for $93,870 on the final house price. Instead of creating new barriers to entry, we need to focus on incentivizing local governments and the private sector to work together to increase available housing stock in ways that best suit the communities that they serve. Unfortunately, the Department of Labor finalized a rule in August of 2023 that only increased red tape. Dr. Antoni, How has DOL's final rule impacted the costs of multifamily housing construction?
Well, thank you, Senator, for the question. Unfortunately, instead of focusing on measures which will remove red tape and therefore reduce costs, they have essentially created a system where they are, essentially, they are going to increase costs on home builders. And we have to remember that those costs are simply passed on to the home buyer, or in this case, the renter. And so instead of decreasing costs by allegedly making things more efficient, whatever the case may be, for those renters, the reality is that the average renter is just never going to actually recoup the initial costs that are being put upon them in the form of higher rents. A recent study, for example, showed that these regulatory costs are actually 3 times higher than what DOL has estimated them to be. And so when you're talking about a regulation that really only has a marginal benefit, and now you explode the cost by 3 times the original estimate, there is absolutely no benefit at all.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.